And we've got some breaking news in the trucking industry. Dozens of Sioux Falls workers left without job and paycheck after trucking company closes its doors and shuts down all its terminals. Reported on July 12th, 2019. I've been in this business for 30 years. I've watched them all fold. LME, Lakeville Motor Express, shuts its doors. LME, Lakeville Motor Express, shuts its doors. Let's get into the article. Dozens of Sioux Falls, South Dakota workers were left jobless Thursday, July 12, 2019, when a Minnesota-based trucking company with local operations abruptly closed. When LME, based in New Brighton, Minnesota, shuttered more than 40 terminals with almost no notice this week, July 12, 2019. 600 workers in the communities across the region were affected. In Sioux Falls, roughly 30 or so dock workers, truck drivers, and clerical workers were affected, said Sean Mason, a former employee. Mason was working at LME's terminal in northern Sioux Falls, South Dakota, when the company's executives sent a late afternoon email saying the company was closing effective immediately. "You're told you're doing a good job," Mason said, and then all of a sudden, "Oh, we're closing our doors." And that's typical of the trucking industry, and I don't care how big the motor carrier is. The bigger the motor carrier, the more debt-ridden they are. I'm going to say it again. The bigger the motor carrier, the more debt-ridden they are. I've seen it happen before. Let's not forget Consolidated Freightways. In the early 2000s, 2003, 2002, Consolidated Freightways, CF, shut its doors. Carolina Freightways, Navajo Freightways, PIE, Pacific Intermountain Express, Roadway, T&T Dugan. I could go on and on. There's another one, I can't remember who it was here in the Midwest. Oh, C&H or C&R Freightways closed its doors. The closure and layoffs come after LME was instructed in June by a federal judge to pay out $1.25 million to former employees of Lakeville Motor Express, a company the judge called an alter ego of LME, which has the same owners. The judge issued a cease and desist order forbidding LME's Incorporation's owners from creating additional shell companies to avoid responsibilities. In 2016, a week before Thanksgiving, Lakeville Motor Express closed, stranding 90 workers and truck drivers without jobs or back pay. The owners of Lakeville Motor Express also established LME and continued to run trucking operations across the Midwest, even as they faced lawsuits from the National Labor Relations Board and Teamsters Local 120, the union representing workers of the old company. Now let's be fair about this. I've been in this business for 30 years. The reason that the Teamsters Union is in there, as with most trucking companies, is because the owners of the trucking company are not treating their employees decent, not paying them overtime, requiring them to work 50 hours or more without any overtime, or not paying overtime, time and a half at all, and yet they're still working at the same decimile terminal. According to the Department of Labor, if you're working at the same terminal and you never leave the premises, then you're entitled to overtime, time and a half. Don't let anybody fool you. I already been down that road and got that straight from the Department of Labor when I sat with them in Topeka, Kansas on another issue. A lot of drivers are confused about that loophole that trucking companies don't have to pay overtime, time and a half. That's true if you're a road driver for line haul and you go outside the 100-mile radius of your decimile terminal. But if you stay within your 100-mile radius of the Dawson Mile terminal, they do have to pay overtime time and a half. Because you never leave the 100-mile radius. You get outside that 100-mile radius, then no, they don't have to pay you overtime time and a half. Already been down this road years ago. Our plan is to utilize an alternate carrier to assist in getting all freight delivered, and some staff are remaining to help with that. Freight handled by the alternative carrier will be billed by the alternative carrier, but with your LME rates applied to the invoice. Yeah, right. There will be some delays in the transit of these moves. They may be significantly delayed in some remote locations. LME hauls what's known in the business as less than truckload freight, or LTL, the transportation of relatively small freight or packages in single and double pallets. While the Teamsters Union represented former Lakeville Motor Express workers, LME Inc. employees are non-union. It doesn't matter if you're union or non-union, Local 120 President Tom Erickson said. Truck driving and being an LTL driver is one of the toughest jobs in the United States. You're away from your families. The June ruling in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit Court requires LME to pay wages owed to Lakeville Motor Express workers who lost their jobs in 2016. If LME Inc. defaults on payments, the total amount it owes to former employees will jump to $2.4 million. And guess what? They're not going to have the money, and where are they going to get it? $2.4 million. But for those such as Mason in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, who lost his job this week, it's not clear if they'll get the money they earned. Typical of these trucking companies, all of them, whether they're LTL or over the road. Let's not forget back in 2009, 2010, Arrow Truck Lines, which was a over-the-road, more or less a flatbed outfit, shut down abruptly, leaving over 400 drivers stranded across the United States with no way to get home and no way to get fuel to get back to their terminal. Arrow Truck Lines. Let's not forget about those guys either. For those of you who worked for Arrow Truck Lines. Who's going to be here to fight for these people, Erickson said. This is where I believe our elected officials under the NLRB need to step up and fight for these people and get them the money and benefits they earned. Tom Mason, Sean Mason's brother, moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota from Wisconsin 2 years ago and also worked at LME as a pickup and delivery driver. He already has overdrafts at his bank and is sick to his stomach with nerves about upcoming bills, he said. That's theft on their part. You would have thought with the deal that happened back in 2016 they would have just paid it right away and just learned their lesson. Well, it doesn't work that way, because when the revenue is not there and you've got more money going out for fuel and truck payments and truck leasing and trailer payments and insurance and utilities at the terminals, and if you're leasing those terminals, the money ain't there, the money ain't there. It's the way it works in the trucking business. All of it. Don't care if it's long haul over the road or whether it's local. Does not matter. When the money's not there, the money's not there. And here's another article on LME. Lakeville Motor Express shuts down. Breaking news, 400 truck LTL carrier suddenly shuts down without notice. We'll get into the article here. Sources reached out to FreightWaves on the afternoon of July 11th to report that less than truckload carrier LME suddenly and abruptly shut its doors, notifying shippers they were ceasing operations. LME is a regional LTL carrier based in Minnesota that operates throughout the Midwest, according to the company's website. LME has terminals in 30 locations across the U.S., through interline agreements, services all of North America. The site also lists some of the carrier's major accounts, including 3M, John Deere, Orsram Sylvania, Brake Parts, and Toro. The company claimed that the team included over 600 men and women. SaferWatch lists the company having 382 power units and 1,228 trailers with 424 truck drivers. LME has been caught up in litigation with the National Labor Relations Board over disputes related to Lakeville Motor Express, which also abruptly shut down Thanksgiving 2016. So, there you have it. It isn't just that they got a back pay. If they would have treated their employees decent in the first place, they wouldn't have had to have the Teamsters Union come in there. But obviously they were operating shady and seedy, which is why most of these companies have the Teamsters Union in there, because they're screwing their truck drivers and their dock workers. It seems to be the normal business in the trucking industry. If you're new to the trucking industry, let me tell you, I'm 30 years into this trucking industry. I'm going to give you all a heads up. If you're new to this industry and have not been in it very long, and you're a newbie and you've only got 1 to 5 years in this business, let me enlighten you. The trucking industry has always been and still continues to be a shady, seedy business to be in. It's run by shysters, con artists, bullshit artists. All of them. I don't care how big the company is. The bigger the motor carrier, the worse it is. And I could name them all. I've seen the big ones go out just like the small ones. I've seen the big ones sell out to save face and divide up their terminals and equipment and lay off everybody and sell out to another outfit and divide up the tractors and the trailers and the terminals to smaller outfits. Seen that happen more than once. It's a shady, seedy business to be into. And you guys out there that's got 15, 20, 25, 30 years in this business like I got know exactly what I'm talking about. My suggestion is you find another career besides the trucking business, because it's not a good career to be into anymore. It hasn't been for the last 25, 30 years. I got in on the tail end of what was left of a good thing and tried to ride it out. And so far, well, I've worked for 17 companies that's went out of business. What the fuck's that tell you? 17 companies that's went out of business or sold out. They are no longer around. What's that tell you? Good business to be in? Don't think so. And here's another article. Minnesota carrier that employed hundreds of truckers suddenly shuts down. The company has been described as an alter ego for another trucking company that laid off nearly 100 workers without notice just before Thanksgiving in 2016. And if you think because you work for a company that's been in business 20, 30, 40 years, let me enlighten you. That don't mean jack diddly shit. Because I've seen trucking companies that's been in business 25, 30, 40 years end up bankrupt and out of business. So just because you think you work for a trucking company that's been around 20, 30, 40 years, that doesn't mean jack. Get your head out of the bubble. Don't be naive and foolish and clueless. A Minnesota trucking company closed down for good without warning yesterday, leaving hundreds of workers stunned. Multiple sources reached out to CDL Life to confirm that LME has closed their doors for good. According to Federal Motor Carrier Safety Association's Safer website, LME Incorporation operated 382 tractors, power units, and employed 424 truck drivers. And there's a sign on the door right there. LME is closed for business. Trucking company shuts down. Yep, well, it's not the first one. It won't be the last one. One source told CDL Life via email that 2 of my family members were working for LME, Inc., and today they abruptly closed their doors and sent their employees home, as they did so back in 2016. To make matters worse, employees have been informed that they will not be getting paid for the last 2 weeks of work. The company's website informs customers that the company will no longer be accepting pickups. I want to highlight this. Very important. To make matters worse, employees, that means truck drivers, dock workers, office staff, any mechanics, have been informed they will not be getting paid for the last 2 weeks of work. How's that grab you for a professional company? Yet they want you to be professional to drive their trucks and jump through all kinds of hoops with no accidents and tickets and have all kinds of experience and have experience to be a dock worker operating a forklift. But this is how they treat you. All these trucking companies. It ain't just this one. It's all of them. They're all full of shit. And the bigger the motor carrier is, the bigger the trucking company, the worse it is. LME Inc. has been described as an alter ego for Lakeville Motor Express by the National Labor Relations Board. Just before Thanksgiving in 2016, 95 union workers employed by Lakeville Motor Express say the company suddenly locked its doors at the Rossville, Minnesota location and laid them off without pay. Well, I got news for any of you who out there are going to bust the union. It ain't just the union guys, it's the non-union companies that are just as bad. I can name at least 10 to 15 of them, non-union ones, that shut their doors, sold out, and laid off everybody without notice. So, it ain't just the union companies, it's the non-union ones as well. While the Rossville location filed for bankruptcy, the former employees said that the company simply moved to Maple Grove, Minnesota, and changed its name to LME, or Finish Line Express, according to the Minnesota Star Tribune. Teamsters representing the laid-off workers say the new Maple Grove location was staffed by lower-paid, non-union employees from Lakeville Motor Express. In January 2019, the National Labor Relations Board ordered the company to pay back wages for 89 of the 95 laid-off workers and to offer them new jobs that became available. As of April 30th, 2019, the National Labor Relations Board issued orders for LME to begin paying out the required back wages. Failure to begin issuing checks within 60 days would result in the judgment doubling from $1.25 million to $2.4 million. This is a developing story. So it's not just Lakeville Motor Express I've seen this happen to. I've seen it to non-union companies too. C&M Cartridge out of Kansas City, Missouri did the same thing. Non-union company. Been in business for 30 years. I had a driver tell me in 2005 he'd been with the company for 30 some odd years. The company ain't going nowhere. That's what he told me. And a guy by the name of John Oley bought the company and purposely ran it into the ground and bankrupted it, who used to be a terminal manager at one time for T&T Dugan in Kansas City. John Oley is his name. He purposely ran this company into the ground, C&M Cartridge, and bankrupted it and didn't pay the employees. A lot of shysters out here in the trucking business. A lot of con artists. It's a seedy, shady business to be in. Let's look at some other companies that's went out of business over the my career of 30 years. Let's take a look. Breaker 19. Who remembers the old Viking motor freight? Anybody ever drive for them? How about Global? Remember Global van lines back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s? Yeah, they were popular on the interstates back then. Used to see them out there on I-80, I-70, I-10. Pacific Intermountain Express, they were big. LTL outfit in the Midwest and West Coast. Yep, Pacific Intermountain Express, PIE. Tried to go to work for them when I was 17 years old. They wouldn't hire me. PIE, Pacific Intermountain Express, LTL carrier, less than loaded. They were pretty big back in the day. They too went away, just like all the other truck lines are going away. Then you got, Navajo. It's not the Navajo I was looking for. Most of these pictures I just grabbed off the internet, but these aren't trucks I drove. But then there's Consolidated Freightways, the old CF. Before they ended up repainting their rigs to look like this before they went out of business. You got notified you didn't have a job by watching the TV and radio. For those that remember everybody getting laid off and the terminal shutting down at Consolidated Freightways. Then there was American Freightways. I drove for them for a short while, about a year. Then there was Campbell Humping to Please. Always had that camel on the side of their trailer. Goofy shit. Out of Springfield, Missouri. Campbell Humping to Please. You got Carolina Motor Freight. I tried to go to work for them once. They hired me, and 2 days later called me up and told me they was out of business. They're shutting down. Carolina Motor Freight hired me, and I never even got to start the job, and they done called me up and laid me off. Go figure. Then there's Graves Truck Line. They were real big here in the Midwest. Yep, Graves Truck Line. There's T&T Dugan. I drove for them. They're out of Wichita, Kansas. They're no longer around. It's USF Dugan now. Jones Truck Line, Jones Motor Freight. For those of you who drove for Jones before they went belly up, went out of business back in the 80s and 90s. And then there's Transcon. They were real big back in the 70s and 80s, 60s. Yep, Leeway Motor Freight. Remember them well. They were pretty big here in the Midwest and East. Yep. Navajo, there's the Navajo I remember, back in the 70s and 80s. They were pretty big. Overnight Transportation, worked for them for about 6 months. I quit them. They didn't treat any of their drivers and dock workers worth a shit either. They eventually sold out to UPS Freight. Roadway, they got bought out by Yellow Freight. Yellow Freight bought out T&T Dugan, their equipment, in Roadway, Yellow Freight bought out Roadway. Terminals are no more, trucks are no more. Ryder Pie, they were around for a while, before they went belly up. And then the old Watkins Motor Freight used to run out of the California and across the desert. Used to see their trucks. Yep, those were the good old days. They're gone now. There is no more good old days. Everything's went to ELDs, plastic shitty trucks that get you killed. And these trucks nowadays are nothing but plastic pieces of shit with no power. And they got automatic transmissions. Who would have figured that they'd be putting automatics in there because they can't find drivers that shift and use a clutch? Oh well, life goes on. Find another occupation besides driving a frickin' truck. You'll constantly be out of a job.